right, we've got him. He was, speaking of Europe, he was on London radio. I just heard him on London radio. He's used in, television, radio, New York, California, San Francisco, Los Angeles. He's a brilliant former federal prosecutor, but his true brilliance on top of the other brilliance is somehow decoding some of the legalese and the stuff associated with so many legal cases. Today, the Supreme Court takes center stage. He's David Katz, everybody.
Hi, great
Hello,
to be
sir.
with you.
Thank you. A little drama getting you here, but now we've got you. Can you hear me, sir?
With the rain and the mud and all of that, the canyon I come over didn't have a sign on it, but when you got on it, it was just totally cut off, and so you had to go back around. And so I'm very sorry about that. I don't think in over a year on your show I've ever done a plug, but I do want to mention that tonight I'm scheduled to be on Newsroom on CNN at 9 p.m. Pacific time.
Great.
That goes all over the world, and of course it's to talk about this remarkably, potentially important U.S. Supreme Court hearing this morning.
Well, speak about it. I was talking about it in the first hour a little bit. It seemed as though the justices, regardless of their general political conservatism or liberalism, were coming at things from more or less the same standpoint, which was the precedent set.
Well, Mark, you made an excellent point when this first started to get bandied about, and it started to get a lot of publicity, not just in Colorado, but these challenges to Trump appearing on the ballot on account of the fact that he had engaged in this insurrection, as we all knew and as we all could see. And once you see this provision in the U.S. Constitution, Article 3 of the 14th Amendment, how can it be when it's so clear that an insurrectionist like Trump isn't being kept off the ballot? And you'll recall that two very well-respected Republican conservative commentators had written a very high-profile editorial about it. And you were skeptical at that time. And, that it really was not going to ultimately go anywhere. It would be reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court before it went anywhere. Was the U.S. Supreme Court really going to back up such a novel, even if correct, textualist argument? Would it create a huge backlash, even if it somehow happened? Would people think that Trump was not getting a fair shake? He says that over and over again, and you roll your eyes. Maybe this was really an instance where he wasn't getting what looked like a fair shake. And then there was, of course, always the concern that they would turn around and they would say, Kamala Harris raised money for some Black Lives protesters. Isn't she someone who aided and abetted an insurrectionist? What goes around comes around. Can't two tango on this issue? You expressed a lot of skepticism at the time, and I think that some of those chickens have come home to roost, because I think what's about to happen is that Trump is going to have a high-profile win, or what he'll portray as a win, in the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the particulars of it is that it's very clear to me from the argument this morning that what they're looking for, the U.S. Supreme Court justices, at least 6 of them, maybe even more than 6 of them, is an off-ramp, because they just don't like the precedent of this. And I think they see in this some swing state keeping a Democrat off the ballot. They see just all the kind of peril and potential chaos that you see in this. Of course, the counter to that is, what chaos, what peril? That horrible hasn't happened yet. All we're talking about is Colorado following due process and doing what Colorado did in Colorado under Colorado law. What chaos? Colorado's not even a Trump state. What other state seems to be going that way? Maine. That's not a Trump state. Where is this chaos? But I would not bet money, Mark, that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to turn around and say, yep, what Colorado did, it had a right to do under Colorado state law, and we're just going to affirm what Colorado did. I am not betting on that at all.
Yeah, we're showing this, and I think it's a bit deceiving. Conservative justices signaled they were seeking a way to side with Trump. I mean, that's one way to look at it. But I listened to the oral arguments, and again, I don't have the legal mind to really, and the sense of history, and they're citing different casework. But it was, I thought, pretty easily followed from both. That's the point I was trying to make. Conservative justices, that's where I think that's a bit deceiving, but also liberal justices. I played earlier the Kagan questioning, which suggested, so you're telling me that if Michigan wants to take somebody off the ballot, they can, and so on. So that's a liberal, or thought of as a more liberal justice, asking the same questions that would seem to defend Trump, if you want to think of it this way.
Well, it's very hard to get back into those historical moments. They're trying to get into what the framers thought, not the framers back in the 18th century, but the framers of the 14th Amendment, which is right after the Civil War. Trying to get back into what they thought, trying to get back into the historical record since then, get back to the fact that, the Civil War was kind of sui generis, and we really haven't had anything like a Civil War since then, thank God. And so there really haven't been, the insurrection, the rebellion, if you think of it in those Civil War terms, of course we haven't had a precedent since then. Having said all of that, if you're a textualist, if you're an originalist, if you're someone who's going to go back and say after more than 100 years, the Second Amendment doesn't have to do with the militia, that the Second Amendment gives you a right to keep and to bear arms. If you're going to go back and be such a textualist and say that 150 years of precedent or lack of precedent doesn't really matter, because look at the text. If you look at the text of the 14th Amendment, it doesn't say anything about Congress has to do it. It doesn't say there's one kind of officer and there's another kind of officer. It looks very plain on its face. And you also have to remember, Mark, that we had all of these different ways to pick. Each state sets its own rules. Each state decides what the rules are and who makes the rules, even in a presidential election. Yes, we're electing a federal president, but we're doing it state by state under state rules. Back in those days, think about it, the state legislature might have picked the person. They might have had some system of electors that then picked the person. People have pointed out, the historians who've been on TV, they're getting their 30 minutes of fame. Every historian of that period that appears on down a lot of them on national TV. And what they pointed out is that Lincoln wasn't on the ballot in a single state, and yet he won in 1860. We've had instances where people have been kept off the ballot. Perot had a tremendous time trying to get on the ballot because the rules, state by state, set the bar so high that only somebody with Perot's money, when Nader ran as a third-party candidate and may have tipped the election to Bush and not Gore, to the extent the U.S. Supreme Court's majority didn't tip the election to Bush and not to Gore. But Nader wasn't on the ballot in many of the states, and he made a huge difference in the state that he was on, Florida. So, I mean, this idea that it's so remarkable, how can this be happening? This question that I think Kagan has, how can it possibly be that one state not putting somebody on the ballot can affect the national election? It was like, read your history. You moderates and liberals on the Supreme Court, read your history. That could happen. And like I said, in a state like Pennsylvania, we have a political process. If the political process in Pennsylvania ends up with Trump taken off the general election ballot, that's part of our democracy. That's not, oh my God, this is the falling of democracy. You got to get on a ballot in enough states, and you got to win the electoral votes of enough states to become president. What's so remarkable? Having said all of that, I still think that the majority is going to find an off-ramp so that this does not become the law after this decision is rendered. He will be on the general election ballot in Colorado, and I think every other state in the aftermath of the decision that the Supreme Court's going to make. But 3 dissenters, maybe 1 or 2, well, it wouldn't be, maybe 1 more. Can't guess who that would be. Maybe Gorsuch will really surprise us on this one. Maybe Barrett. But the minority, Mark, you know what they're going to say? They're going to say a lot of what your listeners are thinking. They're going to say it's clear as glass. It's totally transparent. I see it. There's nothing complicated about it. Trump was an officer. Trump engaged in an insurrection. He fomented it. He didn't tamp it down for 3.5 hours as they were marauding through the Capitol and saying they were going to hang Pence. We all saw it on TV. It's crystal clear, and it says that an insurrectionist can't be on the ballot. Colorado correctly took him off the ballot under Colorado law and gave Trump due process. But that's not what the majority is going to say, Mark. It's just not.
Fomented is a ding word. This is the question that is asked by many. Randy says, so after all this, what is the 14th Amendment applicable to, and how does it work?
So here's Trump's story. Trump's story is that he gets to run for president, and that it violates his constitutional rights and the constitutional rights to vote of his voters if he's taken off the ballot by any state. Then if he ends up being the winner on the equivalent of January 6th in 2025, the Congress has to decide what to do. And they're going to have two functions: to count the votes from the various states and also to decide whether Trump can hold the office of president. His argument is he gets to run. And so the 14th Amendment would mean, in this cramped, self-serving view of Trump's lawyers, that the Congress could decide that he could not hold the office. This would be just like if a 28-year-old Taylor Swift, when she was 28, caught on, somehow ran, somehow won, apparently won, and then they would say, no, the 14th Amendment says that somebody, or the Constitution says that somebody under the requisite age cannot hold the office. So yes, it looks like you won, Taylor, but you don't have the right age, and so we're not going to let you hold the presidency. Of course, we all know that's totally unrealistic. Someone who ran and won would be perceived in America and throughout the world as the winner. I can't imagine a Congress that would then say to the person right before they were getting ready to hold office, nope, you can't hold office.
So many are saying, yeah, we saw the insurrection with our own eyes. The Supreme Court, cafeteria constitutionalists. I mean, there's that as well. But let me ask you then, and in reference to another one of these questions that's just come in from Tony in San Antonio, how does the Supreme Court, here, I'll put it up on the screen for you to see. How does the Supreme Court, that had no problem overturning Roe v. Wade and what that did to the country, get away with saying they are scared of what precedent this sets?
Well, they're not going to base their decision on this is the right ruling, but we're scared of the precedent. All of Trump's, the violent Trump supporters, they're few, but still they add up to a scary amount. We'll go crazy. We're scared of the violent reaction of them. No court in its right mind is ever going to say that there are hecklers' rights. They're scared of what the reaction would be, either in the streets or as a matter of precedent. But in the questioning, it was over 2 hours, all the 9 justices asking questions. There are questions that would lead Tony to have the question that he had. Courts do think about the precedential impact of their decisions. And of course, Dobbs was just an example where they refused to follow precedent. You know what their argument is? Their argument is, thank God the Supreme Court didn't follow forever the precedent of Plessy v. Ferguson. Thank God we had Brown v. Board of Education. Some great wrong that's lasted a long time. Better correct it, better rectify it later than never. That's what they said about Dobbs. So, when they want to get around precedent. But, one thing which is shocking, Mark, is that those 3 justices that Trump appointed or nominated and then got approved, they all gave that little canned speech. I think Alito gave it too, a 4th one. Oh, yes, they believe in precedent. They're going to follow precedent. And then when Kavanaugh didn't follow the precedent of Roe v. Wade, remember Senator Collins from Maine says she was shocked. She was bamboozled. How could this happen? They have an awful lot of power. They have a power to rule on this case. I mean, there's basically 3 things that they could do, Mark. 1, they could rule against Trump, which people think is very unlikely. The second, they could find an off-ramp, which is pretty procedural. They could say, Colorado's ruling only had to do with the primary. And the primary ballots went out already with Trump's name on it. So one of the things that I've always thought is a possibility is they'll simply say this is moot. If a case comes to us that involves anyone being taken off the ballot in the general election, that's a different kettle of fish. And of course, no one will be able to get their challenge to anyone being taken off the general election ballot in time or get expedited enough. But that's a great way for the Supreme Court to kick the can down the road. Now, the more pernicious way they can kick the can down the road and not decide it on the merits is to say, well, it all comes down to what Congress is going to do. It's not self-executing. There needs to be either a law by Congress to put it into effect, or there needs to be a decision before Trump might actually hold the presidency by Congress. And the liberals say, there is a way that even if the Colorado type rulings stand up, there is a way for Congress to approve. And it's Congress by a 2/3 vote. This is another way Congress could get involved, not the cop-out way that I think the U.S. Supreme Court may say. But the real way would be Congress, I believe, can excuse any candidate, even from an apparent defect. So in other words, Schwarzenegger, if he'd have run and Schwarzenegger had won in the Electoral College, I think that the Congress could have turned around and said, you know what, even though he wasn't naturally born, he wasn't born in the United States, there's no reason. And they could basically, if you want to call it, countermand that instruction in the Constitution. I think for Taylor Swift, I mean, let's assume it wasn't Taylor Swift. Let's assume it was the greatest political genius in America who caught on, and everyone said, this is the guy, this is the gal that should be president, but the person was 29. I think after all that, the argument would be that Congress, by a 2/3 vote, Congress is never by a 2/3 vote going to excuse this defect, and the defect is one of Trump's own creation. As they say, nobody disqualified him. He disqualified himself under the 14th Amendment. He chose to engage in insurrection. It rose to the level of an insurrection. When he saw that it rose to that level for over 3.5 hours, he didn't tamp it down. Trump disqualified himself. But that's not what I think the ruling is going to be. I think the ruling is going to end up being, for all intents and purposes, Trump can run and he can hold the office, and nobody can do anything about it except go to the polls and not vote for him in the swing states.
The statement that Trump made, we have to finish up here because I do have Belinda waiting, and but I'm so glad. I think we've really explored and fleshed out pretty cleanly what's going to happen and the effects. Kim, can you put it back up there again, the remarks of the former president? He, of course, talked about his Trump's response to this morning's arguments. I heard and I watched, and the one thing I'll say is they kept saying about what I said right after the insurrection. This is all a quote. They kept, and the one thing I'll say is that they kept saying about what I said right after the insurrection, which I think was an insurrection caused by Nancy Pelosi. If you take a look at my words right after, take a look at my speech from the Rose Garden, you'll see very beautiful, very heartwarming statements. So that's the Trump remarks. No need to. Can
I just say? It heartwarmed to the tune of 5 people getting killed on account of this. If they had they were within feet of Mike Pence. Mike Pence, whatever you think of him, and I disagree with him on so many issues, but he is a great profile and courage. If you think of what would have happened if Pence would have left the Capitol and they would have put, what's his name, Grassley in charge as the most senior Republican, I believe that Grassley would have done exactly Trump's bidding. We came so close to losing our democracy, and any finding fault with Pelosi is ridiculous. First of all, member McConnell was in charge of the Senate. So if Pelosi could have done more, no, she couldn't have, because McConnell wouldn't have gone along with it, and they would have needed to do it as a group. But on top of that, the idea of calling out 10,000 National Guards, people who might have been loyal to Trump. Remember, Trump suspiciously put those people in charge of the Department of Defense. Who knew what they were going to do? One of them was General Flynn's brother, who was on the call where they delayed sending relief over there for an hour and a half. You'd have had to have been out of your mind to have said to Trump, in that situation, everything that was building up to January 6th, oh, Trump, why don't you have your Defense Department that recently installed by you, send 10,000 troops over to the Capitol? Are you crazy? That would have been the coup. He wouldn't have needed his insurrectionists, who he knew were armed, by the way, and who he'd encouraged. And you can't get out of it by saying, go there peacefully and patriotically protest, after you've said 10 other things. Every con man, every swindler in the world tries to put in some tiny little bit and then rest their whole argument on that tiny little disclaimer that they made when the whole thing was a scam, the whole thing was an incitement. This absolutely does not hold water. Everyone, believe your lying eyes. Believe your lying ears. Everybody out there, you know what happened. You saw what happened. You saw the buildup. You saw he didn't tamp it down for 3.5 hours. He did this. He's good for this. But this U.S. Supreme Court, conservative majority, 3 justices that he appointed, is going to save his bacon on this one.
Yeah, it sure does look that way. David, so appreciate it. The other thing that's coming in just at this moment, we really have to wrap up, but the Biden document case, there's the special counsel that was appointed to investigate essentially Joe Biden's retention of documents, classified materials. That was it seemed the White House was interested in creating no favoritism, as there was an investigation of the former president, Donald Trump, who, as you know, he had, thousands and thousands of documents in bathrooms and ballrooms and, offices in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, they're really, in one way, they're not at all comparable, but in another way, they didn't want to. This is what the libs do. They're so worried about being called out on stuff that they oversteer. Anyway, it's in, and the report just in is that the special counsel, Robert Hur, has released a report and essentially it calls out Biden. Isn't that it, Kim? It just happened in the instant we've been talking.
And if I remember, if I remember the fellow who was appointed special prosecutor, he's totally nonpartisan. He's certainly not a card-carrying Democrat of any sort. These are not comparable situations. These got boxed up and they ended up in some place that was Biden's warehouse or Biden's office. Of course, Trump's thing is totally different. They were highly national security documents. He flaunted them. He showed them off to people. He knew that he had them. He obstructed justice. He BS'd and had his lawyers BS the Department of Justice. Had he just returned them, he wouldn't even been having these problems. He said that he had no national security documents, that all the rooms had been checked. And it turned out that Trump had BS'd his own lawyer. His own lawyer got in a huge amount of trouble. He had somebody who certified this thing. She needed to go get her own lawyer. It's absolutely not comparable to Biden. Biden did nothing wrong. And this special prosecutor investigation backed him up on that. I better get off your show or Belinda's going to start putting pins in a voodoo doll of me.
I feel bad for having to cut it short, but I'm so glad we had some time with you today. We'll pick up on the document thing, which will be used politically to smear Biden and to essentially negate and offset anything around the Trump Biden stuff, the Trump document stuff. I do want to mention again, though, tonight, David Katz is on CNN. What's the name of the show again?
Newsroom at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And guess where it broadcasts from? London. I'm big in London.
You are, yeah.
We got to go to London. The Three Musketeers here. We have to go to London. It'll be wild.
I'd love
Remember
that.
Trump said it'll be wild. It'll be wild.
There you go. Break a leg tonight. We'll look for you on CNN. Maybe we'll run some highlights tomorrow. So say something insightful.
I always try.
We'll love seeing you. Thanks so much, David Katz, everybody. David, thank you. Thanks for pulling it together. Yeah, wow. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.